Yes, hello to everyone. I welcome you all to this new daily news digest session. Today is 27th of December, and the nation pays tribute to our ex-Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh. And the articles which I have are basically on his legacy, and I believe it's a huge loss to the nation. So, to discuss the first article, Manmohan Singh's government's lasting legacy, the RTI Act. This is the first article which I want to discuss. Uh, RTI is a very important legislation from 2005, and India has joined a club of a very few countries which have implemented the Right to Information Act. Approximately 20 years have passed, 19 to be precise, and it remains a very potent tool in the hands of the citizens of the country. Let's try and discuss as to what this act is. Dr. Manmohan Singh will be remembered for many things. His lasting legacy as Prime Minister will be implementation of the Right to Information Act. His demise comes as the RTI Act enters its 20th year of its implementation and is a very powerful weapon in the hands of the ordinary citizens that no politician can take on publicly, even if they choose to blunt it. Why we are saying this? Because RTI bill was introduced in the Parliament in December 2004 and was passed by the Lok Sabha on May 11, 2005. That is why we call it the RTI Act of 2005, and by the Rajya Sabha the next day. During the debate on the legislation, this is a very famous quote by Dr. Singh. He said to the Lok Sabha, the passage of this bill will see the dawn of a new era in our process of governance, an era of performance and efficiency, an era which will ensure that benefits of growth flow to all sections of our people, an era which will eliminate the scourge of corruption, an era which will bring the common man's concern to the heart of all processes of governance, an era which will truly fulfill the hopes of the founding fathers of our republic. That is the significance of the RTI Act. This legislation was in fact first brought by Dr. Singh's predecessor, Sri Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government in 2002 as the Freedom of Information Act. However, the Vajpayee government did not frame the rules for it, and hence the act never got implemented. When Dr. Singh took over, he first considered framing the rules for the same Freedom of Information Act. However, later a bill was prepared to enact the RTI, that is Right to Information, which eventually came to implementation on October 12, 2005. That is when the RTI came into force. When it framed the RTI Act, India became one of the very few countries to have such a legislation. While the first such legislation was implemented in Sweden, Sweden is the first country to have such legislation long back since 1766. The US brought in one in 1966, while the UK enacted a law to this effect in 2005, like India. Since then, several countries have followed suit, with nearly 120 now boasting of a similar legislation. Soon after the RTI Act's implementation, complaints poured in from government offices of being deluged with applications because there were too many applications associated with the RTI Act. Though Singh never criticized the law as such, but as the but at the sixth annual conference of the Central Information Commission in October 2011, he said, a situation in which a public authority is flooded with requests for information having no bearing on public interest is something not desirable. We must therefore pool all our wisdom, our knowledge, and our experiences to come to a conclusion on how to deal with vexatious demands for information without at the same time hindering the flow of information to those whose demands genuinely serve public interest. That is the reason why we've had to somehow ensure that the process becomes more streamlined so that the vexatious or frivolous litigations need to be curbed. Again, next year at the annual Confederation of Indian CIC conference, he raised concerns about frivolous and vexatious use of act in demanding information, the disclosure of which cannot possibly serve any public purpose. In 2010, during his second term as the Prime Minister, his government exempted the CBI from the purview of the right to information. However, on the whole, the UPA government remained proud of the legislation, with leaders from Sonia Gandhi to Rahul Gandhi citing it. Singh too remained convinced of its power, despite many alleged corruption scams under his second term being unearthed under the same act, that is the Right to Information Act. Now let's discuss the potential question which can be asked from this particular act. With reference to the Right to Information Act 2005, consider the following statements. The RTI Act was preceded by the Freedom of Information Act 2002, which was never implemented. That is correct. India was the first country to enact a law ensuring access to information for citizens. No, this is not the case. We have discussed Sweden was the first country in 1766 which brought in such a legislation. The RTI Act was introduced during the tenure of Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh. This is also correct. Central Bureau of Investigation is exempted from the purview of the RTI Act. This was done in 2010 as seen from the article. So the correct answer to this question is statement 1, 3, and 4. Now let's move to the next article at hand. This is the second article I wish to discuss about. From verge of collapse, how Manmohan Singh introduced the 1991 economic reforms. Another of his very important, very significant contributions. These are also called the LPG reforms, and this is something which we read in our textbooks of economy as well. In 1991, when Manmohan Singh became the finance minister, India was on the verge of economic collapse with foreign exchange reserves sufficient to cover only a few weeks of essential imports. They had dropped down massively. This was compounded by the weakening of the Soviet Union in the late 1980s, which had been a source of cheap oil and raw material and a market for many Indian products for years, most importantly, allowing India to trade without the need for US dollars. This is one very important contribution which was associated with the Soviet Union. At the moment, Russia-ruble arrangement is also an indication wherein we have done away with the need for dollar. So history somehow is repeating itself right now. Faced with one of the most serious challenges in independent India, Dr. Singh decided to introduce the economic reforms in 1991. And this was focused on liberalization, privatization, and globalization of the Indian economy, the opening of the Indian economy, to say the least. Aligning with market-driven principles. In his 1991-92 budget speech, Dr. Singh turned the tide for the economy for years to come, stating that over-centralization and excessive bureaucratization of economic processes have proved to be counterproductive, that India needed to expand the scope and the area for the operation of market forces. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Narasimha Rao unveiled the new industrial policy, which introduced widespread structural changes to the Indian economy. Through the industrial policy, the Indian government allowed direct foreign investment of up to 51% foreign equity and removed bottlenecks to facilitate foreign technology agreements in high priority industries. After 4 decades of planning for industrialization, we have now reached a state of development where we should welcome rather than fear foreign investment. Direct foreign investments would provide access to capital, technology, and markets. This was reasoned by Dr. Singh in his budget speech. The new industrial policy was a landmark document. It's a very significant, very important document, and that resulted in economic liberalization. It abolished industrial licensing system. We had a lot of licensing requirements earlier, which were reduced. And all projects, barring a few select strategic industries, were abolished from the ambit of licensing. This also allowed the government to disinvest in its shareholding in the public sector and amended the MRTP, Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act, to allow for setting up, expansion, and merger of businesses without prior approval. These reforms followed a sharp jump in oil prices in August 1990, leading to an unmanageable balance of payment situation, depleted foreign exchange reserves, along with massive capital outflows, pushing India closer to the possibility of a full-fledged default. In what has stayed in public memory ever since, the government devalued rupee on July 1st, 1991, and the RBI transferred over 46 tons of gold from its reserves to the Bank of England for borrowing foreign exchange to manage liquidity resulting from the balance of payment crisis. This is a very significant step. Singh also rationalized the reforms as being essential for increasing competition between firms in the domestic market to incentivize raising productivity, improving efficiency, and reducing further cost. Furthermore, he envisioned the public sector as an engine of growth rather than as an absorber of national savings without adequate return. Singh's first few months as finance minister were also defining moments in his fledgling political career. Manmohan Singh Ahluwalia, who was the Commerce Secretary in 1991, wrote that in the run-up to the budget speech that year, Singh deviated from the tradition of silence to tackle criticism from opposition parties questioning the government's reform policies. Another thing that becomes very important associated with Dr. Singh is Manmohan Singh's first shot as a politician, countering criticism and trying to build public opinion in favor of reforms. In his previous incarnations as a civil servant, he had spoken in much more guarded terms. He was now openly taking on the left, although his gentle academic persona came through more interested in converting people to his point of view than castigating them for criticizing him. This is a beautiful line associated with the traits or qualities of Dr. Singh. Singh was not Prime Minister Rao's first choice for finance minister. After Pranab Mukherjee was ruled out and IG Patel declined, Rao reached out to Singh to offer him the position of the finance minister. A very beautiful quote, which is from Vinay Sitapati, who has written in his book Half Lion, which is a biography of P.V. Narasimha Rao. He says, a Cambridge-trained economist who had just served as the Secretary General of the South Commission in Geneva, Manmohan Singh was very much the internationally credible face that Rao was searching for. Manmohan had also held every significant economic post within the Indian government. Rao wanted a visibly honest reformer whom the West could trust. He also needed a loyalist who could deflect domestic criticism away from the Prime Minister. And that is the reason that we had a brilliant finance minister in Dr. Manmohan Singh and eventually a very successful Minister who took the nation to new heights. This small video is a tribute to Dr. Singh and his spectacular achievements. With this, I would like to end today's session. Thank you so much.